Welcome to Cornerstone Home Inspector Education Center. Today we have Rhode Island Standards of Practice, Module 2 for years 25 to 2027. I have Stan Bajerski here, co-owner of Cornerstone, and we are going to be going through the Rhode Island State Standards, and this will be available in a two-part webinar series. To receive credit for this webinar series, there are viewing codes during this presentation that must be submitted when you submit for your certificate. So I'll hand it off to Stan for the next slide.
Thank you, Jim. Since July 1st, 2020, anyone who conducts a home inspection for a home or other residential property located in Rhode Island must be licensed as a home inspector or associate home inspector in Rhode Island. And they have developed these standards of practice very similar to, there are actually 33 states that are regulated in some way, shape, or form, and they all have a set of standards of practice that are very, very similar. Maybe some small changes in language or small additions, but all in an effort to make sure that we're all on the same page when we're out there doing home inspections. Okay,
For a
Jim.
long time, we're able to just go into Rhode Island and do inspections, and now they have pretty good standards that home inspectors have to abide by. Standards of practice, purpose and scope. These standards provide home inspectors with the purpose, scope, and requirements of a home inspection. Minimum standard. These are not exhaustive, but rather a minimum standard for all home inspectors. Basic understanding. They offer a fundamental understanding of the work of a home inspector is expected to perform. Performance foundation. Inspectors must use these standards as a foundation for their professional performance. So, um, one of the things on this slide is these are not exhaustive, but rather a minimum standard. So the state of Rhode Island will allow you to go over the standard, but this sets a rule of minimum standards.
Right, and you have to look at this to some extent as protection for you as well as the homeowner, home inspector. Um, so when you form this base and you can build off it, um, the state of Rhode Island and many other states, they uh, want you to, and we'll get into this, I believe, in uh, deeper into the presentation. They want you to have your clients know that they can, if they have any questions, concerns, or complaints actually about your inspection, to contact the board, and the board will stand behind you as long as you have stuck to the standards. Doesn't mean you can't go beyond them, but at least you've met those minimum standards. So it's kind of important to stick to them. So these standards of practice are intended to provide home inspectors and associate home inspectors with the purpose, scope, and requirements of a home inspection and provide the basic understanding of what work a home inspector is to perform. These standards of practice are not all inclusive, but are a minimum standard upon which a home inspector, associate home inspector must use as a foundation for his or her performance. These standards of practice establish the minimum performance requirements for a home inspector and an associate inspector to conduct the home inspection. For the purpose of 5.22 of this part, the term inspector refers to the individual conducting the inspection, be it a licensed home inspector, licensed associate home inspector, and or trainee. The purpose of the home inspection for residential buildings, including their attached appurtenances, is to provide the client with an inspection report that forthrightly discloses the physical condition of all systems and components, which are readily accessible and is observable and inspected pursuant to the contract, including those systems and components which are safety hazards as observed at the time of the inspection. An inspection carried out under the standards of practice for home inspections is not and shall not be construed to be a comprehensive architectural and or an engineering study of the dwelling in question. Because a home inspection is limited in its scope and depth, The information provided to the client is not intended to provide the client with protection from all risks involved in the home buying process. And let me just say that last line, line C, really needs to be hammered home when you talk to your clients. They need to know that ahead of time. You need to set those expectations ahead of time. I don't care how many more add-ons you may be able to provide that go a little deeper. The basic home inspection is summed up to me as far as your liability and trying to minimize it with that line right there. That's very important. What do you think, Jim?
Absolutely. Plus B, um, let's see, excuse me, A, uh, or which are safety hazards observed at the time of the inspection. And that's really key too, because how many phone calls do you get 6 months, 8 months later? My air conditioning went, my heater went, my water heater went, and the report has to show what's going on at the time of the inspection, and that's so much um, put into the report. It's very important that that verbiage be put into the report when you're writing your paragraphs and sentences. The water heater was in good condition at the time of the inspection. No rust, no corrosion was noted. So this way, if it does, if you do have a problem later on, you have that narrative that can protect you. So, all right,
Agreed.
let's move on. Access. Safe access and sufficient lighting shall be provided to the inspector as to ensure that all systems and areas to be inspected under this standard are readily accessible and observable. General requirements for a home inspector. Inspector shall observe readily accessible and observable installed systems and components, submit a confidential written report only to the client unless otherwise instructed by the client, identify required components, indicate which systems and components have not been inspected, indicate the condition of inspected systems and components that were found to be in need of repair, record the client's name and the address of the property inspected, record the on-site inspection start and finish times, record the weather conditions at the time of the inspection, record the existence and obstructions and or conditions that prevent the inspection of the installed system and components. The report shall only inform the client if additional investigation is required when the scope of the repairs is unknown or there is potential for and it is suspected that there is concealed damage or the subject area is beyond the scope of the home inspector's expertise. So there's a lot here. So
There is, and I'd like to first make a comment on that first statement at the top of the page with the safe access and sufficient lighting. Um, if so, who's going to be responsible to provide that? And if it's not there, do you disclaim that area, or do you just go in and do the best you can? I think most of us understand the limitations, the sometimes lack of communication prior to us arriving at a home if things are not ready to be inspected. I know from my um, years in the profession, I just try to make it work there. I try to get everything organized. I don't want to leave an inspection. I don't want to leave parts of an inspection out. So that's an interesting line right there. Um, also,
one of the things that I do, sorry to interrupt you. One of the things that I do is if I'm working with an agent, I'll tell the agent, you need to make sure that I can get in if there's a hoarding situation or something like that. Is the electricity on? If we're going to be inspecting sometimes, in the winter, if you're inspecting later, it might be dark. What do you do if there's no light? We all know to just try to schedule around that. The other thing I do in my pre-inspection agreements when I send them out prior to the inspection is put in them and I highlight it is that I got to be able to get to all the systems and I have to be able to see them. And that's, with sufficient lighting and access. And that's up to then you're putting that onto you've informed everybody that that needs to be done prior to when you arrive. Now it's never done. So,
well, you would think that that's just a known. right? That it
Right,
has to be, but you sometimes have to make sure people, you got to
right.
remind them.
And then
And
number
then
number 4, indicate which systems and components have not been inspected. That's huge.
that's really big.
Yeah,
You know, any restriction to the inspection is very important, just to protect yourself later, because people aren't going to remember. Oh yeah, the garage was filled with boxes and couldn't get to that window and things of that nature.
yeah,
Also, the bottom three, the scope of the repairs is unknown, and that's when you would um, advise somebody else to come in. So, for instance, if you're inspecting a deck and some of the balusters are missing in the railing, or the stair treads are loose, I think it's a no-brainer to say that the carpentry repairs are needed to restore the railing or stairway, you know, to a safe and usable condition. But if you find termite damage and you don't know the extent of that damage, then you can hand off, or a heating system that doesn't seem to be working properly. We don't need to go into details about why that's not working. We just identify why we think it's not working properly, and then pass that on to an expert in that field. And um, I think based on what I'm learning, that some people are trying to go too far in that, and that
yeah.
extends your liability. I was told a long, long time ago when I started my business 150 years ago that my attorney told me, "Do you're not a licensed heating contractor. You're not a licensed this. You're not a licensed that. Be careful on how you report on repairs." Um,
Exactly. And, 7, 8, 9, something, let's hold on a second. Yeah, 6, 7, and 8. That's in if you're using standard, software, that's gonna be in there. Those are fields that you're gonna have to fill out. What's the start time, the end time? I've been starting I always put the exterior weather, but what the temperature is, if it's raining, but I've been putting the interior temperature too. I've added that in, especially if I'm gonna be handling anything outside the scope like mold or anything like that. It's good to have that information in there. So, all right, let's move on to the next slide. I You up, Stan, or do you
yeah,
want me
I
to
got
read
it.
that? Okay.
So a written contract and home inspection report is required for all home inspections, with an original copy of the contract and the home inspection report delivered only to the client unless otherwise directed by the client. The inspector must state in the report when any system or component observed is in need of repair or requires further evaluation or investigation. Additionally, all reports must include the licensee's license number, a notice that any claims regarding the home inspection or home inspector's associate home inspector who performed the inspection may be directed to the board, the current address and telephone number of the board, and where applicable, a disclosure that an inspection was performed by an associate home inspector. The oversight of activities other than direct observation performed by the supervisor in order to provide guidance may include, but are not limited to, meeting with the supervisee, reviewing reports prepared by the supervisee, review and evaluation of the supervisee's activities in connection with the home inspections, and supervisory conferences that may be conducted by telephone. So we really need to keep um, track or continue that education as we are in charge of these people that we're training, who will eventually become licensed home inspectors. Jim, you have any comments?
that better now?
Yeah, but we're going to
Okay.
start this over.
No, we're good. Just a little bit here. So if you can hear me better now, sorry about
Yep.
that. Um, the license numbers kind of easy. And then what I was saying was disclosure that an inspection was performed by an associate home inspector. That can be uncomfortable for newer inspectors because it goes into what their, you know, how long they've been doing it, maybe what their expertise is, that kind of stuff can be uncomfortable. I know we're not going to go into what other states do, but that's becoming more and more prevalent. I know Connecticut, you have to disclose if you're an intern, um, prior to doing an inspection. So, okay. General limitations of the home inspection. The home inspections done in accordance with the standards set forth in this part are visual and not technically exhaustive. The home inspection standards set forth in this part are applicable to residential buildings and condominium dwellings units under one roof and their attached garages. So if you have a large commercial building, that's probably not considered a home inspection in this. And do you want to go on about technically exhaustive?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting phrase, especially nowadays, um, because when I first started, the home inspection was very basic. There weren't a lot of tools. There wasn't anything. I won't say invasive, but anything that can, if you couldn't see part of the roof, you just said roof's too high, not accessible by ladder. Now we have a drone. Would you consider drones technically exhaustive? Would you consider an infrared camera technically exhaustive because you are now going behind the scenes more than a visual?
Right.
So, you know, in my opinion, and might not be popular, but if you're going to expand the scope of the inspection that way, because those aren't add-ons anymore, those are part of a lot of home inspectors' tool bags.
Right.
Um, the maybe the standards have to now start to take into consideration these things are going to be used. That's just
Yeah.
a thought on my
And I
part.
know some of the contracts, I know in my contract that um, even though it says it's not technically exhaustive, you can, like my contract says that I can do a technically exhaustive contract, but it's going to cost more. Inspection, but it's going to cost more. That's going to be much more because then you're taking off outlet covers, you're going into the heating systems, you know, I'm not going to be pulling off a cover on a heating system, but I might call in a heating contractor to do that. That's going to cost money. So, you can do it, but you're going to have to charge for it. But this is the limitation here. All right. Scope of the inspection. And can you see that good? So it's your turn.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So, system roofing. The inspector shall observe and report on roof coverings, exposed roof drainage systems, flashings, skylights, chimneys, and roof penetrations, and roof penetrations. The
Yeah,
inspector
let's
shall identify the type of roof covering material, the roof drainage system, and the chimney materials. The inspector shall note the methods used to observe the roofing and any signs of previous and or active leaks. Exclusions, in addition to the exclusions and prohibitions found in 5 dash dot 22.5 and 5.22.6 of this part, the inspector shall not be required to walk on the roof unless, in the opinion of the home inspector, walking on the roof will pose no risk of personal injury or damage to the roofing components, and observe and report on attached accessories, including but not limited to solar systems, antennas, satellite dishes, and lightning arresters, and the interior of the chimney. So those are exclusions. You have any comments, Jim?
so So observe and report on the roof coverings, roof drainage systems, its gutters, flashing, skylights, chimneys, um, the type of roof covering material. So you got to tell whether it's an asphalt, metal, the chimney material. That's, is it encapsulated in vinyl, wood, brick, stone? This is interesting though. Walk on the roof unless the opinion of home inspector walking on the roof will pose no risk of personal injury or damage to the roof. Well, that could be every roof. So basically they're telling you you don't have to go on the roof because I mean, even if I could just walk from ground level onto the roof, yeah, you could trip and fall. I mean, it can happen. So I guess this is a way of telling him that if you do not want to go on the roof, you do not have to.
Also, I think sometimes when you're new at this and you are capable of walking a roof, you're going to attempt to walk as many roofs as you can, and you sometimes don't pay attention to the condition of the roof.
Right.
I if I believe a roof is older, um, and the shingles are brittle, and granulars are coming off it or cupping, I'm not going to get on that roof. I've seen enough to say that roof is older. But you can damage those shingles to the point where
Absolutely.
somebody's um, observant enough, they may say, well, I saw some scars on my roof after that home inspection, and make your life miserable or actually create leakage. So I think you need to know when you shouldn't be on that roof, even if you could get on that roof.
Right.
Um, so, even a newer roof, when it's 110 degrees outside, you can mar that roof because it's so hot. So
Exactly.
once I see a couple things that I have a problem with on a roof, then I'm fine with
Right.
what's going on here.
And then,
I always thought walking on a roof was the best way, and it is, but it doesn't mean you can't do a good roof inspection if you don't get on there. So
exactly. And in your report language, you've got them, the inspector shall know methods to use, methods used to observe the roof. So you got to put on in your report whether you walked on it, the edge of the roof, from the ground level, if you have binoculars, all that's got to be in the report. These standards are here to protect you. And if the inspection goes bad 6 months later, following these standards is going to help you.
yeah, and I just
But
add one more thing. If I don't get
sure.
on the roof, I say why. If it was the
Yeah,
weather, if it was the age of the roof, it was the terrain. I also want that documented as well. Why I chose not to get on that roof.
100%. And putting on there risk of personal injury.
Yep.
I mean, if it's 3 levels, 3 stories high, you might not be in windy. You're not going to be going on that roof. All right, let's see what we got here. System exterior. The inspector shall observe and report on wall cladding, entry doors and windows, garage door, decks, balconies, porches, stoops, landings, and steps, railings, guard railing, flashings, window wells, driveways, walkways, vegetation, grading, site drainage, and retaining walls with respect to their effect on the condition of the dwelling and their ability to provide safe egress. The inspector shall identify wall cladding materials, the deck, porch component materials. The inspector shall probe exposed, readily accessible, and observable exterior components where deterioration is suspected. Probing is not required when probing would unduly damage the finished surface. Operate garage doors. If the garage is attached to the main dwelling, manually or by using permanently installed controls of any garage door operator. Test and report on the presence of or lack of the visible safety reversing feature of garage doors by interrupting the light beam. So here's another one of these things where there's a lot here. One of the things that stands out to me is the deck porch component materials. It's not only inspecting them, are they solid underfoot? Are they level? There's footings, but what are they made out of? That's got to be in there. And I see so many reports sometimes online that I'll come through and under the deck section, it'll say um, um, sufficient, or what's another word that they use? Satisfactory is the word that I always say. To me, that's not a report. That just checking off a box and saying it's satisfactory, you've not met the requirements of Rhode Island. Okay. Probing exposed, readily accessible, and observable exterior components where deterioration is suspected. If I see a lot of rot, I'll throw my screwdriver in there, take a picture of it. But a little bit, I'm not going to cause more damage. I'll just take the picture. But if it's extensive, I really want to bring that home. Um, Garage doors, if the garage door is attached to the main dwelling, so that if it's detached, you don't have to inspect them. Is that how you're reading that?
Yeah, and that Rhode Island is not the only state that separates them.
Okay.
I think they consider detached garages as an outbuilding. You can do them, but you would have to, but you're not required, which is I don't know, interesting to me. And they're not the only state. And then the how you test these reversing devices has been a debate for years and years as well. Some guys and gals don't want to test them because, and it's happened to me where they, they damage the door opener or pull the track off the wall.
Yeah.
It's happened twice to me. You know what? And if you don't test them, you put in a report why you didn't want to test it. I don't
Yeah.
think
You
it's the
see
end of
the
the world.
like so I always test the beams, and I always test to see if it reverses under resistance. And I was told the best way to do that is to take either a bucket or something like that, try to set it up so that it's not interrupting with the beam. I find that hard to do, so I'll just sort of straddle the beam so that I don't break it, and I let the garage door come down and sort of I'll apply pressure to it with my arm. But you've got to be really careful. There are some garage doors out there that are just so that it's like they made them with aluminum foil. Like they just will crunch and break if
Oh
if
yeah,
they're
for
if that
sure.
yeah, it's pretty bad. So, all right, let's move on to the next thing. And
So
you're up.
exclusions, excuse me, of the exterior. In addition to the exclusions and prohibitions found in blah 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 of this part, the inspector shall not be required to observe and report on the following. So storm doors and windows, screens, shutters, awnings, and similar seasonal accessories, fences, landscaping, trees, swimming pools, patios, irrigation systems, safety, glazing, recreational facilities, any other dwelling units or addresses in multi-unit buildings, outbuildings, and detached garages right there, underground utilities, pipes, buried wires, or conduits, to install any object under the vehicle door to test for the automatic reversing feature of a vehicle door opener. Now,
Right.
there's a lot of things there based on my experience that we're not going to, or they're not included as part of your general or standard home inspection that your clients are going to want to know about. And I try to address those. Today with the computer, I can 99.9% of the time take a look at a house before I inspect it. And I can determine certain things that may not be covered under the inspection, and I can address that with my clients ahead of time. And I just want them to know that, a lot of these things, say pools, jacuzzis, hot
Right.
tubs, things of that nature, can be addressed by somebody else, and they should bring somebody else in. But that's all part
Right.
of the property, and it's sometimes difficult to address to them as to why you're not doing it. And more inspectors now are becoming swimming pool experts. Irrigation systems are being inspected.
Yep.
So if they make enough phone calls, they'll find some guy out there or gal who's willing to come in, for additional charges, of course, and do all those things. So again, maybe some things need to be rethought in the future about the inspection
Right.
standards.
The other thing too is, and this is probably for the inspectors who have been doing it a while, you can become sort of not aware of what your client is expecting you to do and what you're going to do. You could be on your second inspection for the day. You had a bad morning. You had a flat tire on the way there. You're not in a good mood, and you know what you need to do, and you just want to get it done. Your client says to you, how long are we going to be there? Which means they don't want to be there. Okay. Those are the clients that really are just not interested, or they've got some scheduling conflict. So you show up. I know what I do is I give an explanation at the beginning of the inspection of what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to do it. When I'm in the kitchen, we're not talking about the attic. And what I say at the beginning is swimming pools, irrigation systems, solar panels, external generation. This is outside my scope. You can ask me about them, but they're not going to be in the report. And that makes the inspection go a little bit easier. I've always found by communicating to your client what is going to happen at the beginning of the inspection gives the client an expectation of what's going to happen. If you just show up and go, I'm going to talk to you about what I've done so far, or let's get started, they have no idea how that day is going to go. If you give them some idea, that makes it go a lot smoother. All right. Viewing code. If you are watching this as a recorded event, which everybody's going to be, you're going to submit your certificates online through a link on our website after you're done watching this. You have to put in RI-102012. System structure. The inspector shall observe and report on the foundation, the floor structures, the wall structures, the ceiling structure, and roof structure. The inspector shall identify the foundation material, the basement floors, the presence of lighting in the attic, and the presence of collar ties and rafter ties in the attic. That's interesting. The lighting and rafter ties. I do put whether there's rafter ties in my report, but lighting I don't. That's not required in our state.
Well, I think if an attic is usable and there's no lighting, I may make a recommendation to put lighting in.
Okay.
One thing I find interesting is, it's easy to report on the foundation, right? It's poured concrete, concrete block. Floor structures. You could say, and they're separating them here, but you can use a blanket statement that says the house is wood frame, platform frame, balloon framed, or you can say the house has floor joists 2x8, 16 inches on center with wood or steel cross bridging. I used to do that when I first started. Um, I just use uh, general terms for framing. And I'm going to tell you why. A lot of things that I used to do when I first started out, I don't do anymore, only because it's irrelevant to the client. The client's not going to go, Hun, we're not buying this house. It's balloon framed instead of platform framed.
Right.
They will maybe not buy the house if the framing's rotted, termite damaged, blah blah blah. But so I just took all that extra stuff out because I don't want to muddy the waters for people who don't know what that may even mean.
Right.
I like to get to, is it good or bad? What's wrong with it? And then whatever the state wants in there, I'll put in there just to meet the standard. But I just want to make sure my clients know what they're reading and can extract the important stuff out.
100%. Yeah, I was like I commented that I put the collar ties in because when solar started to come along,
Yeah.
people were getting the calls. The solar guy's out here and the attic's not able to support it because there's no collar ties and they have to beef it up. And why wasn't that in the report? So now I just put them if they're in there or not, and we go forward on there. You're up.
System structure. The inspector shall probe, expose readily accessible and observable structural components where deterioration is suspected. However, probing is not required when probing would unduly damage any finished surfaces. Note the methods used to observe underfloor crawl spaces. Note the methods used to observe attics, and note signs of previous in or active water penetration into the basement, underfloor crawl spaces, and attic, including the presence of sump pumps and dehumidifiers. So, as a person who spanned 4 decades of home inspections, and when I started, we just had a written report. And these things were kind of important to indicate if you got in the crawl space. Actually, it was back in those days, it was customary for you, if you got in a crawl space, to put a business card on the other side of the crawl space so you can prove you were in there. Or If you were in an attic space or you took the cover off, I'd take a cover off a panel and I'd see two other business cards in there just to prove, because sometimes the client wasn't with you when you were doing those things. So today with pictures, you can prove you were how you were in there if it came up later. Um, but entering and traversing is a good phrase um, for crawl spaces and even basements. I walked, traversed the basement to observe underfloor framing. Wording is very important, and part of it is just proof that you looked at it. Now, with at least in some states, you have your clients with you. In a lot of states, the clients are not there, and then your reporting method is much more important because they weren't there.
So this on number 4, signs of previous and or active water penetration into the basement, underfloor crawl space, and attic, including the presence of sump pumps and dehumidifiers. So they're not saying that you have to inspect the sump pump. They're saying you just have to note if there's the presence of one.
Yeah.
That's kind of a little weird. Because do you when you're inspecting, do you turn on a sump pump if you're able to? Will you lift the float?
If I have access to it, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
You ever been shocked? I got shocked twice. Not fun.
I don't get too crazy if
Okay.
it's difficult. But yeah, I do.
Okay.
Some of it's for show, just to show to
Yeah.
people, you, especially with first time buyers. I may do a little more because they've never experienced any of this before. As far as half of them don't even know what a sump pump is. So it depends on my clients. If they know everything already, then I just move on.
Okay, exclusions. In addition to the exclusions and prohibitions found in these sections of this part, the inspector shall not be required to collect engineering data such as the size, span, spacing, species, section modules, slenderness ratio, and or modulus of elasticity of the structural members. Provide access to the items being inspected, responsible of the client, seller's representative. Enter the underfloor crawl space if it's not readily accessible, if access is obstructed or denied entry would damage the property, if a dangerous or adverse situation is suspected and reported by the home inspector, observe and report on wood destroying insects, rodents, and or vermin unless specifically contracted in for writing. Um, Enter the attic space if it is not readily accessible, if access is obstructed and or entry would damage the property, if dangerous or adverse situation is suspected and reported by the inspector, or walk on exposed and or insulation covering framing members. That's a big one. I had a client several years ago, and I went up into the attic. It was a pull down stairs, old house, 1850, I think. And the attic was definitely underframed, bunch of insulation everywhere. And I said to the client, I'm not going to be walking through here and I don't want you up here. And the client insisted on going up. The agent was there. And I said, I'm telling you again, do not go up there. It's not safe. That's why I did not walk around up there. And sure enough, he put a leg right through the ceiling in the living room because he insisted on going up. The agent looked at me and said, "Well, what are you going to do now?" And I'm like, "I'm not going to do anything. You're going to call the homeowner and tell the prospective buyer that they damaged their ceiling." I said, because I told them 3 times not to go up there. Um, the other thing too is on insulation. When you're a newer inspector, don't assume that there's plywood underneath the insulation because there could not be. Um, I remember when I first started, Stan, you told me I really don't like going on a roof until I go into the attic and I see
Yes.
what's going on there. And, that I didn't even think of that. Like, why wouldn't you be able to go on a roof? So there's so much that you don't think about when you're not seasoned and know what you're doing, that these standards will help. If I know I train inspectors and I tell all my inspectors, you need to read the state standards at least twice a year. It's so helpful just to refresh
To
yourself and
refresh.
to
Yep.
Yeah, just to read, you know, you don't have to go through everything, but just go through what you're required to do and what you're not required to do. It's so important. But do you have anything on this or
No, I think that's all pretty straightforward.
good? Good. Okay. I'll take this one because it's a little bit smaller print here. So there's been some updates and changes to the Rhode Island electrical. Rhode Island recently passed a new law impacting on how home inspectors can handle electrical inspections. And we're going to go through a little bit of a breakdown. So here's what the new law covers. Effective January 30th, 2025, the law prohibits licensed home inspectors from opening electrical panels, removing covers, or accessing internal wiring, and from internally inspecting outlets or other electrical devices. Only licensed electricians may perform these internal inspections. The law carries a serious consequence. The first offense can result in fines up to $1,500. So let's go through what a home inspector still can do. Updated clarification issued March 31st, 2025 by the Department of Business Regulations. Home inspectors can turn on and off light switches, screw in bulbs, plug appliances into outlets, use plug-in receptacle testers, press the test button on GFI outlets. These actions are considered part of a basic non-licensed functional check and are allowed. The Board of Examiners confirmed February 19th, 2025, the use of receptacle testers and GFI testing buttons remains legal since they don't qualify as an in-depth electrical work. So let's do a little bit of a quick summary, what's prohibited and what's not. What is allowed is now you can go into a home and turn on and off a light switch. You can plug in testing light bulbs, use receptacle testers and GFI testers. You can test appliances. What you're not allowed to do is remove the cover panels, opening outlets or devices, internally inspecting wiring, and performing detailed electrical diagnostics. So this is really, really interesting. I know some Rhode Island inspectors, and they're not too happy about this.
Well, it takes almost the most important part of the system is the panel, in my opinion,
Yep.
and it takes that out of your hands. So some guys cheer because it reduces their liability and the scope of their work.
Right.
I'm curious to see how they handle that. Do they try to bring somebody in with them to complete that portion? Is it on the homeowner or the buyer? Um, uh, and I'm also interested to see if other states start to pick up on that. So you're still doing quite a bit of what you used to do in the living space, right? In the finished spaces,
Yep.
basically.
Yep.
Um,
You're
so just an
testing out there.
interesting event that happened there.
Yeah. It's basically not it's basically just, you're not taking the panel off. And, I understand what they're trying to do. I think they're way misinformed. Um, the other thing too is I know at least in our state, it's illegal for you to come into my house if you were not a home inspector and take off my panel. But I can take off my panel. So you could, I guess, if you're a home inspector in Rhode Island, say to the agent, just have the homeowner take off the panel, and I can inspect it that way if it's visually accessible, if you're not taking it off. I personally wouldn't do that. I think there's too much liability on that to have a homeowner do it if there was some problem. And then you have a panel that's not guarded, which is very important for safety reasons. But, I don't think the state of Rhode Island's really thinking this through, but that's up to them. Okay. You're up.
So exclusions. In addition to the exclusions and prohibitions that we discussed, the inspector shall not be required to collect engineering data on the compatibility of overcurrent devices with the panel and or determine if short circuit interrupting current capability. Determine the adequacy of the ground and or the in-place systems to provide sufficient power to the dwelling or reflect on the sufficiency of the electrical distribution system in the dwelling. Insert any tool, probe, or testing device inside the panels. Test or operate any overcurrent device except ground fault circuit interrupters. Dismantle any electrical device or control other than to remove the covers of the service and distribution panel. So this is a little bit outdated because you already can't do that now.
Right.
However, the inspector is not required to remove the cover service panel, distribution panel, if the panel covers are not readily accessible, if there are dangerous or adverse situations present, or when removal would damage or mar any painted surfaces and or covering materials.
You're not doing
Quality
that.
of the observe the report on the quality of the conductor insulation, low voltage systems, doorbells, thermostats, and or telephone security alarms, cable TV, intercoms, all other ancillary wiring that is not part of the primary electrical distribution system, underground utilities, pipes, buried wires, or conduits, and test or operate arc fault circuit interrupters. That's kind of prior to so you're still able to do that because you don't have
Mhm.
to take the electrical panel cover off to do that, but they're telling
Right.
you that you're not required to operate an arc fault.
Right. Plumbing. The inspector shall observe and report on the water supply and distribution system, including piping, supports and insulation, fixtures, faucets, the drain waste and vent pipe system, including piping, including supports, traps, drains, waste, and vent piping, piping supports, and piping insulation. Hot water systems, including the water heating equipment, normal operating controls, the presence of automatic safety controls, and flue piping. The inspector shall identify the types of water distribution material, the types of drain, waste, and vent piping, the types of water heating equipment, and the nameplate capacity of the water heater equipment, gallons and or gallons per minute, and the location of the main shutoff valve. The inspector shall operate all plumbing fixtures where practical and include their faucets if readily accessible. One of the things I always do, because the husband's usually following me around, I'll bring anybody over 8 years old, including the wife, to show them where the main shutoff is. And I really make a point of that. If there's a leak in the house and you freak out, this is where you go to shut the water off. And I've gotten 2 calls in about 15 years from husbands who are like, "Thank God that you showed her where that was because we had a pipe burst. She ran downstairs, shut the water off, and there's basically no damage." So it's important to do that. Do you have any comments on this page? It's pretty simple.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You know, you're looking for leaks, basically damaged materials. Describing the materials is okay. It's somewhat irrelevant unless you indicate that certain materials aren't desirable anymore, like galvanized pipe or uh, lead mains, things of that nature. That's why
Right.
I think identifying, but it's a pretty basic plumbing inspection. It's not intrusive. It's not technically exhaustive, and I think pretty standard when it comes to the standards of practice. So
Most most water heaters have a nameplate capacity on them, but if you don't, I guess you'd have to put the limitation if you're unable to determine whether it's a 30, 40, or 50-gallon unit. But most water heaters today, they'll have some kind of identifying information on what the capacity is.
yeah, you know what?
Okay.
I'm just going to throw a blanket statement out there for any component. If you can't determine its age, don't get crazy. Just say that. That's all you have to say. I mean, you
Right.
couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Exclusions. In addition to exclusions and prohibitions that we talked about already, the inspector shall not be required to test the operation of any valve except water closet flush valves and fixture faucets. Collect engineering data on the size of or length of water and or waste systems and or remove covering materials. Report on the adequacy and or the efficiency of the in-place systems to provide sufficient hot water to the dwelling, sufficient water supply or drainage for the dwelling. State the effectiveness of anti-siphon devices. Determine whether water supply and waste disposal systems are public or private, and or observe, operate, or report on the exterior hose bibs, fire suppression systems, irrigation systems, water quality, wells and their related equipment, foundation sub drainage systems, the interior of flue linings, underground utilities, pipes, buried wires, or conduits, water conditioning and infiltration components and systems, filtration components and systems, excuse me, and operate any laundry equipment, including washing machines and dryers. Just to go back to the determine if it's private or public water supply, when a sewer line goes out the house, if you don't know ahead of time that there's sewers in the area or if the house is connected to the sewer, you don't know where that's going. But with generally with public water, there's going to be a water meter in the house. And if you don't see one, it doesn't mean it's not public water. It could be in a curb box outside someplace. But generally with a private well, you're going to find some type of equipment that would identify whether it's pressure tank, something. But if you don't know, you don't know, and you state that and have them follow up on it.
One of the things I do, at least when I meet a client at the beginning of the inspection, is I'll say, "Is this public water and public sewer?" And they'll go, "Yes," or they'll go, "No." Now in my report, what I go, let's say they say yes, I put in public water, public sewer per client. And I've been doing that for over 15 years. So now it comes back, "Hey, we have a septic system." Well, it's not funny because I asked you at the beginning of the inspection whether this was public or private. And you said it was public. And I have it right in the report per your comment. And I've been doing that the same way for every inspection for 15 years. So it's important. I've had clients twice come back to me and say, "Did you know I had a septic system?" And like, "No, it's outside my scope, but I did put in the report that you told me that it was the public, and that's your due diligence." So, okay. Heating system. Got about 10 more minutes here. The inspector shall observe and report on the heating equipment, normal operating controls, automatic safety controls, the exterior of the chimneys, flue piping and vents, heating distribution systems, insulation, the presence of an installed heat source in each habitable room, including kitchens and bathrooms, the presence of fireplaces and the operation of their dampers, readily observable fuel storage tanks and their related equipment. The inspector shall identify the type of energy source, identify the heating equipment, identify the distribution system, piping, and ductwork. Open, readily accessible, and operable access panels provided by the manufacturer or installer for routine homeowner maintenance. The inspector shall note the presence of installed heat source in habitable rooms, including kitchens and bathrooms, the presence of exposed flues in smoke chamber being utilized by other appliances, the existence of abandoned oil tanks, and any observed evidence of underground fuel storage tanks. A couple of these things stand out to me. In our state, um, putting in the report that there's heat in every habitable room, that comes up a lot more than you would think it would. Center Hall Colonial, the half bath, a lot of times they don't have any heat. Remodels on the second floor of a Cape where they gave out the roof and they put a bathroom in there. A lot of times there's no heat. Finished basements, a lot of times there's no heat because they've never been, you know, they've never been cold down there. And I'll walk into a bathroom and the first thing I do is run the water. And while the water is running, I look for a heat source. And if there's no heat source, I just turn to the client and I say, "This is habitable space. I don't want you to panic, but in my report, it's going to read that there's no heat source here. You have an envelope of heat all around your room, but our state requires that I tell you that." The other thing here is the existence of abandoned oil tanks, and observe evidence of underground fuel storage tanks. So I guess the only way to see that is if you see lines coming through the foundation, pipes sticking through the ground, you know, that kind of stuff. Oh, okay.
Great, Jim.
Any comments? Any comments on this, or you want me to move along here?
No, I think that's you covered it.
Good.
So, in addition to the exclusions and prohibitions found in the section before us, the inspector shall not be required to test and or inspect the heat exchanger. This requires dismantling of the furnace cover and possible removal of controls. collect engineering data on the size of the heating system equipment and or the size and length of this distribution system, report on adequacy or uniformity of the in-place system to heat the dwelling and or the various rooms within the dwelling, attempt to override heating or cooling temperature limit sensors, operate heating systems when weather conditions or other circumstances may cause equipment damage, or when the electrical and or fuel supply to the unit is in the off position, ignite or extinguish solid fuel and or gas fires, identify the type of insulation coverings, inspect humidifiers and electronic air filters, inspect the interior of flues, and inspect fireplace insert flue connections. I don't know if there's anything, I mean, determining the capacity of the heating system, could be I mean, you're not going to do it, but if you see that the house was expanded and with an addition and you don't believe the heating system was changed, that could be an issue. You can
Right.
address that any way you want, but you don't have to, is what your standards are saying.
Yep.
So you got to be alert, observant, and if you think there could be an issue, then you may want to say it's outside the scope of inspection, but you may want to follow up on it.
Exactly. Your second viewing code is RI 102023. Central air conditioning system. The inspector shall observe and report on cooling and air handling equipment, normal operating controls, cooling distribution systems, insulation and exposed supply ductwork. The inspector shall identify the type of distribution, operate the systems using normal operating controls, and open readily accessible operating panels provided by the manufacturer or installer for routine homeowner maintenance and report on conditions observed. So that's pretty basic. I would think that sometimes when we come from the winter to the summer, I know a lot of homeowners will take that disconnect on the outside, they'll flip it around so that the unit can't be run. You come in on the first day where you're going to test it and the air conditioning's not working. So I will go into that shut off and flip that breaker around if it's upside down to start the unit. But and we know that we shouldn't be running air conditioning if I think it's under 65 degrees for a 2-day period prior to the inspection. And my understanding is that's really for older units. The newer units, not so much. You can run them.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of the new units have crankcase heaters on them. As long as they're energized, they're heating the oil, they're stopping the
Yeah.
refrigerant from turning into liquid. But I
So,
think it's just best to stick to that. I mean,
to the,
we're not going to go in there and look for that crankcase heater and then say, oh, yeah, you got one. It's not going to tell you much when it's that cold, anyways, just that it turns on.
right.
Um, So more exclusions, collect engineering data on the size of the cooling equipment, the size or length of the distribution system, identify the type of insulation coverings, report on the air filter condition or effectiveness. I kind of at least pull them, and if they're dirty, I say they should be replaced. Operate the cooling system when weather conditions or other circumstances may cause equipment damage or when the electrical supply to the unit is in the off position. Inspect evaporator coils or report on the adequacy or uniformity of the in-place system to cool the dwelling and or the various rooms within the dwelling. Just so you know, one of the biggest, I'm not going to say mistakes, but when you go from an older house to a newer house, some things could change. And a lot of times, HVAC guys just replace what was there. And it may not be effective, like I was talking about with the heat. So we don't have to determine the capacity, but
Right.
sometimes, I mean, if you're in a house and the thing, you got the air conditioning on and it ran the whole time and never cycled, it's either very dirty, low on freon, or it's undersized.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Um, General interior conditions. The inspector shall observe and report on walls, ceilings, floors, steps, stairways, balconies, hand and guardrails, countertops, and representative number of cabinets, a representative number of doors and windows, and separation walls, ceilings, and doors between dwelling units, and an attached garage or other dwelling unit. The inspector shall note signs of water penetration and operate representative number of kitchen cabinets, drawers, doors, and windows. That's pretty simple. Um, all right, let's move on.
So in addition to those any exclusions in the previous section, um, the inspector shall not be required to observe and report on the following: paint, wallpaper, and other finish treatments on the interior walls, ceilings, and floors, drapes, blinds, or other window treatments, determine the fire safety rating of any wall, ceiling, and door between a dwelling unit and an attached garage or another dwelling unit.
Perfect. System insulation and ventilation. The inspector shall observe and report on exposed insulation in unfinished spaces, ventilation of attics and underfloor crawl space areas, bathroom venting systems, kitchen venting systems. The inspector shall identify the existence and or absence of bathroom ventilation other than windows. Again, that's pretty simple. Exposed insulation in unfinished spaces. You go into an attic, it's unfinished, you see insulation, you got to talk about it. The ventilation of attics, just don't call out that there's a ridge vent, a gable vent, and soffit vents from the outside of the house. You really need to confirm that when you go in. How many times are the soffit vents are covered up? How many times now are you finding that the ridge vent was not cut out properly and it's not even there? They put the cap on, but they didn't cut the wood off. So make sure your outside comment is the same as your attic comment on the inside. So go ahead.
Exclusions. Um, you're not required to observe and report on the following: the types, amounts, or adequacy of insulation and or its material makeup, concealed insulation and vapor retarders, the adequacy, uniformity, and capacity of the in-place systems to ventilate the various areas of the dwelling.
Okay. General exclusions. In addition to specific exclusions that described in this part, the inspector shall not be required to provide information on the remaining life expectancy of any component or system, the causes of the need for repair, the material for correction of the problem, the method of repair, other than to indicate the repair should comply with applicable requirements of the government codes and sound construction practices, compliance or non-compliance with applicable regulatory requirements unless specifically contracted for in writing. Any component or system not required to be inspected in this part, cosmetic items, items that are not readily accessible and observable, underground items, or items not permanently installed, systems or components specifically excluded by client, as noted in the contract. Inspector shall not be required to offer warranties, guarantees, or insurance policies of any kind on the property being inspected, collect any engineering data, inspect spaces that are not readily accessible or observable. We've been through this. Enter any area or perform any procedure which may damage the property or components or may be dangerous or unsafe to the inspector or persons as determined by the reported, as by determined by and reported by the inspector. Disturb or remove insulation, stored and personal items, furniture, equipment, plant life, soil, snow, ice, debris, or obstruction access visible. Determine the effectiveness of any system installed to control or remove suspected hazardous substance. Predict future conditions, but not limited to failure of components. Pro- uh, Project operating costs of components. Determine extent or magnitude or damage of failure noted. Operate any system or component which does not respond to normal operating controls. Test for radon gas. So there's a lot here, but we've all been through this. How long is my heating system going to last? You know, I don't know. It could break tomorrow. It can go another 10 years. No one knows. How much does it cost for me to run this? You know, you're not going to be able to supply that information. The causes for need repair. If I had $1 for everybody time, why would they do that? Why did that break? Why did this happen? You can't, you can't get into that cycle. So, and again,
You know,
cosmetics. I don't like the wallpaper. So,
when we make these presentations, whether it's the law seminars for different states or just the webinars that we have on individual components of the process of the home inspection, we know that we're looking at maybe a divided audience of the new people coming into the business that are still formulating their knowledge and their procedure, and the veterans who have heard all this 150 times. But
Right.
you will develop a way to deflect those questions without
Upsetting the client. Yeah.
yeah, because these are legitimate questions by people, especially people that don't really know a lot. And maybe a nail pop to them looks like the house is going to fall down, and we know that it's not. You have to
Yeah.
address it just to make them feel like you're on their not on their side, but that you're going through all this. But the
Yep.
state standards are a minimum that you have to do. They're not saying that you don't have to do those other things. You can comment on them, but make sure they know that that's not why you're there. And that I think they'll be comfortable with that. So determine the presence or absence of pests, including but not limited to rodents or wood-destroying insects. Determine the energy efficiency of the dwelling as a whole or any individual system or component within the dwelling. Perform environmental services, including determining the presence or verifying the absence of any microorganisms or suspected hazardous substances, including but not limited to carbon monoxide, latent surface and or subsurface volatile organic compounds, PCBs, asbestos, UFFI, toxins, allergens, mold, carcinogens, lead paint, radon gas, electromagnetic radiation, noise, odors, and or any contaminants in the soil, water, air, wetlands, and or any other environmental hazard not listed in this part. Determine the level of soundproofing between walls, ceilings, floors, doors, and between dwelling units. Inspect surface and subsurface soil conditions, and inspect household appliances.
Gotcha. Prohibitions. Inspectors are prohibited from reporting on the market value of a property or its marketability and or its sustainability of the property for any use. Advising their client about the advisability or inadvisability of the purchase of the property. Offer or to perform any act or service contrary to law and regulations. Determine the cost of repairs on any item noted in the report or inspected by them or their firm, offering to make or perform any repair or provide any remedy, including but not limited to performing engineering, architectural, surveying, plumbing, electrical, heating services, pest control, formaldehyde, or any other job function require occupational license and or registration in the district where the inspection has taken place on a dwelling and or residential building inspected by his or her firm. The only exception is if those repairs and or services are part of a negotiated settlement of compliant or claim against the home inspector or the firm he or she represents. Operating any system or component that is shut down, otherwise inoperable. However, the home inspector shall recommend that the seller and or seller's representative demonstrate that those systems or components are functional. Turn on any electrical or fuel supply or device that are shut down. So, again, I went through these pretty fast, but you've been there. The client says, "Would you buy this home?" You know, the client says, "Hey, I'm paying $500,000 for this. You think that's good?" I always just say, "Speak to the agent, speak to the agent, speak to the agent." And if they're not working with an agent, I just tell them this is beyond my scope. I don't even know what my own home is worth. And that sort of calms them down on that. And then determining repair costs, they always want to know, I'm going from 100 to 200 amp service. How much is that going to cost? I feel it's okay to tell them, but I'm not putting that in the report because then they'll come back to me and they'll say, you said it was going to cost 3,000 and they're charging me 5,000. So you owe me $2,000. So I think anything that you say verbal at the time of the inspection with the understanding that prices fluctuate and people charge different things, I think is perfectly acceptable, but not having it in the report is also very good. You're up.
So, optional fee-based services. An inspector may provide additional home inspection-related services to address items not otherwise included or which are specifically excluded, provided the service is contracted for in writing, included in the report, does not include the physical repair, abatement, or treatment to the dwelling and or residential building being inspected, and it is not prohibited under 5.22.7 of this part. An inspector may provide services that require additional licensure and or registration, so as long as the inspector states in writing to the client that he or she is properly licensed and or registered to perform those services in the jurisdiction where the work is being performed. So if Rhode Island requires, if you're doing radon testing, that you are nationally certified, and you are, then you can provide radon testing. If Rhode Island requires that you be a licensed pest control company to talk about termites, then you can do that and include that in your services, so on and so forth.
Gotcha. Conclusions. Rhode Island state regulation defines all aspects of the home inspector profession, set guides for lines of leadership, licensing, education, and continuing education, provides a code of ethics. Standard of practices define the scope of the inspection as well as the limitation and exclusions, identifies required items to be described and reported on, can be used as a defense against complaints. So this is important. It's sort of giving you an outline of what you have to do, what you don't have to do. And if you do those things in the report, that you can use that as a defense if there's going to be something put against you.
So this is a hard one. Thank you all for attending.
Well,
Don't forget to submit your codes to get your certificate. If you are watching this section first, we also have the our ethics. You need both of them. There are separate submissions on that one as well. If you have any issues, contact us. We're always available and we'll help you out as best we can. So thank you and good luck inspecting in Rhode Island.
Thank you.